give our program today, so if y'all would give them a hand and get started.
These chairs are the...
Oh, the chairs are...
No, they're getting more chairs.
Oh, I see. I don't know where to start. Let me introduce Mark and I real quickly. And then the idea that we're kind of working on, as we drove up here today, we said, not quite sure where to start or where to go next, but we'll work on it, is that I'm going to show you some slides for a few minutes, and then we'll talk some questions, whatever you want to know. We'll work with that for a while. And then I've got some more things to show you at the end, all right? And Mark, this is Mark, is...
Hey, Mark.
Why don't you introduce yourself, because I can never do it well enough.
Okay, my name is Mark Walters. I live in Smith County, across the river. Was a farmer there for many years, a landowner, and all my life I've been interested in archaeology. Grew up in the country picking up arrowheads and so like that, and then when I quit farming, I was hunting something to do, and I got a little interested in archaeology, and being a person who does few things in moderation, pretty soon I was this deep in archaeology. So anyway, it's been fun for me. I've learned a lot, and anyway, maybe I have a couple of things I can pass on to y'all that being interested and so on like that. So I'm also affiliated with the Texas Historical Commission, and they have a program of stewards scattered around the state. They have an archaeology division, but they don't have very many people in it. Texas is a big state, so we volunteers work in our areas to help landowners with problems that they may have, and do things like this, and try to stay out of trouble.
He's successful at all of those things except the last. So I'm Tom Guderjan. I've been here for 10 years. I'm at University of Texas at Tyler. My job is I'm a professor of anthropology and archaeology, and I'm also the chair of our Department of Social Sciences, which includes criminal justice. That's why I was asking. And a whole bunch of other things. We're not going to get into that. And our Center for Social Sciences Research, and we'll touch on that, what we're doing towards the end of this talk. Okay, we introduced ourselves. There we go. I'm an archaeologist. My primary research is in Central America. That's not what we're here to talk about today. But years and years ago, when I was a graduate student, before I was a graduate student, I did quite a bit of work in West Louisiana. And when I was a graduate student at SMU, I did some work over in Henderson County as well. So I've got a little feeling for the situation here, but I wouldn't call myself an expert at all. And if you want to talk with some experts and ask them, they wouldn't call me an expert either. That's the one thing that we can agree on. But nevertheless, I've been doing this for like 40 years, so I've got some ideas. Let me see if this is going to work. This could be real exciting, I'm not sure. There it goes. Go there. There you go. So, back in my pre-doctoral degree life, and then shortly after, I was at the University of Texas Institute of Texan Cultures in San Antonio. San Antonio is a wonderful place. And one thing we did was we developed a new Native American exhibit. A third of it was on Caddo Indians, a third was on Apache people from the center of the state, and a third were on they're called the Humano people who lived in the El Paso area. Okay, I figured out, I think it was my idea, I'm going to take credit for this. What we do is we build a big mural. So I don't know how long these walls are. 30 feet? 30 feet, I think they're 30 feet. So what we did is we put a 24-foot mural up. So imagine this on that whole wall. And then in front of it, we put cases of artifacts and things like that. And what I learned about museum stuff was, it's like computers. There's hardware and software. The hardware you put up there is always there. The software is when you train volunteers to know what they're talking about and come out there and talk with people and show them. So the software you can change anytime you want to. You can add new stories, you can take away stories. You can say, you made that up again. Which they were caught doing regularly. But this is a mural that was done by a Texas artist named, George Nelson. I just forgot his name. And George and I worked on these for 2 or 3 years. On this one, the first one we did, he did the painting, I didn't do that, right? We went through historic documents, historic descriptions, images, and everything you see here. It's tweaked a bit because artists do that, but it's really a pretty reasonably accurate scene from a historic contact period, Caddo in town. So we have a couple of mounds. We have big flat platform mounds. You're not going to find many of those here. We have some round other mounds. The one on the far right over there, you might see it, Caddo Mound State Historic Site. We'll talk about that. They're farming. They've got corn. This time of year they've got pumpkins. We had a big fight over this thing. Right? Have you ever seen a sunflower this big?
No.
Yes. Yeah. But in some document that George kept telling me, no, it says it's this big. And I'm like, no, it's not. But Uncle, I give up. The turkey feather robe, the black tan leather dress, all of those things are from people's illustrations or verbal descriptions. And this became a poster, which, it's been too long ago now, so you can't get the posters anymore, but if you decide you want the PDF, just tell me and I'll give it to you. That's backwards.
There we go.
Part of that comes from a map. This is the one map we have of a Caddo house in East Texas, or a Caddo community, and it's probably from somewhere not terribly far north of us, up around the Red River. Okay, it's known as the Tehran map, and I'm not, just because of the nature of it, I'm not going to keep that up there long. But it's from the 1700s, all right? Because here's a redrawing of it that is easier to see. I would love to tell you who did this, who the person was who redrew this, but I stole it from the web, so I don't know. But look what they're illustrating. In each little housing compound, you've got a house, you've got storage racks, drawing racks, and sometimes you have mounded features called temples, or that's what they call them. That's what the artists call them. What's probably wrong about this is that you see a little strip of green around each house. More likely that was much, much bigger. I always envisioned this as being, okay, you walk through a couple 100 yards of forest to the next guy's house. Okay. In reality, they didn't have them clustered that closely all the time sometimes, but they were somewhat separated, and each house, each family, each household was probably somewhat self-sufficient, growing stuff, hunting, and so forth. And of course, they did things collectively too, right? So that could be what you'd find if you found a big Caddo site. But that's not what most Caddo sites are. Most Caddo archaeological sites are quite small, separate households, or a place where people just did something for a while, like sit on top of a hill, have a campfire, and wait for deers to go by so they can hunt them,
No.
So, I don't know, Mark, how many How many sites are there in Smith County at this stage? It's a moving target, so I never know.
Okay, you talking about recorded sites?
Yeah, recorded.
Okay, and when he's talking about recorded sites, that's sites that have gotten obtained a number and are on file at the Texas University, Texas Archaeological Research Lab in Austin. So Wood County now has about a little over 600 sites.
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
but those include historical sites, Caddo sites, you know. A site can be anything over 50 years old. So, you know, I could have my grandfather's smokehouse recorded as an I could have my smokehouse as an archaeological site. So,
Yeah.
Wood County's got a little over 600, mostly because of all the archaeology work that was done around the lakes. Smith County is a little over about 400, I think.
Wow.
But then
So,
what percentage of, say, Smith County has been surveyed? One?
well, we estimate that there's an archaeological site every 18 acres.
Wow.
So, you know, there should be tens of thousands of sites
Yeah.
Yeah.
in Wood County, but it's never been professionally surveyed. You know, you have a little spot here at a pipeline that gets a little work, city puts in a new water line, gets a little work, but the biggest majority of it has never been surveyed and recorded. So that's something I'll bring up later in the talk.
I think you just tossed it back at me.
Excuse me, when you say surveyed and recorded, and you, for example, I had to have a new survey of my land when I bought it, and it shows all the land around me, it's all got plot numbers and sizes and everything. Is that what you're talking about? It's like a professional
I'm sorry.
survey?
No, he's talking about a survey for land ownership purposes.
No, this
It's
is
not that at all.
No, yeah, what we're talking about is an archaeological survey.
I see.
We have laws in place now, didn't used to have, but fairly recently in history, that if you do a project that involves public monies, you have to do an archaeological survey, kind of like a wetland survey or something like that, where a professional comes out, looks at the property that's in question and see if there's any archaeological site on it. So that's what we're talking about as a survey.
And unless, say, you personally encourage some archaeologists to come out and do that, or paid someone to do that, because we can't do it for free just because we're too busy, then it will never have been done on your property.
Yeah.
Well, you can bring a class and whatever, my property, you can look around.
You know, I will tell you that is the 17,452nd time I've been encouraged to take a class to do something. It is not happening.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. I can't get my students to show up on time to the class they signed up for. You know, so we do something outside of the building. I lost half of them in the run. I don't know where they go.
Yeah, what people don't understand is that people like Guderjan and University of Texas and stuff are not actively out here doing archaeology all over the country. The only people that's doing archaeology are paid firms doing it for profit. You know, I work for an archaeology firm out of Austin. You know, if they're gonna put in a pipeline across the country like that, we have to do a survey on it. Somebody pays us to go out there and do it. We can only do a 40-foot right-of-way. We can't get outside of it. And that's your archaeology today. You know.
Well, I'm on the board of a rural water supply company, and whenever we put in a new line, we have to do what I thought they called an environmentals.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing?
Yes.
Well, archaeology is a small part of that. You know, you have to do an environmental survey, and archaeology just has to be one small part of that. You know, you
And
go out
if
and check
they
for wetlands.
discover anything there of value, then we have to go around it. We can't. right?
Yeah, well, you have the option of going through, but it's really expensive.
Yeah, about 99% of the time, going around it is the cheap approach.
Yeah, or now the fad is to go under it. You know.
Yeah, you can do that.
You
Just
know.
like the Just like cable people went under my driveway for putting in a cable line.
So, but anyway, we do have laws in effect, but it only covers, if I want to do something on my property out there, I can do anything I want to do. But if I get some federal funds to do it, for instance, chicken houses, that's a big deal now. But a lot of these chicken house folks are getting federal money to build their chicken houses. But when they do that, then they have to do archaeology. So I got a friend that lives up here in Pittsburgh, and he's busy all the time going out and doing surveys for chicken houses, And, so that's it. Okay.
There's another reason why, we can't come out and do this stuff. It's not that we refuse to do it unless you pay us. It is also that we're creative people. So my time, my energy is being poured into my own work that I will have to stop doing to come help you. And I love you. I do. But not that much. Because I have, from my work elsewhere, I have reports and organizing and fundraising and grant writing and public. I got to do all that stuff. Look, I love doing it, and I really do love doing it. But if I come, up here for a week, that's a week that everything else goes behind. So the reality is there is nobody at a university anywhere in the world just waiting for somebody to come in and say, hey, I'm going to come do this.
And this
Now,
is where...
on the other hand, if you two came and asked me, I'd do it.
Okay, this is where an idiot like me shows up, because I'm an amateur archaeologist. I'm not a professional archaeologist. I don't have professional training in archaeology. But I have been very involved in archaeology for a number of years. I said Wood County has 600 and something recorded sites at the University of Texas. I recorded half of those. So I'm the person responsible for our Wood County archaeology. I have done more archaeology in Wood County than University of Texas or anybody else. And I'm just an amateur. So there's a field for you. And I'm going to reach out to y'all to do this. This is where y'all can get involved. You can do things. I recorded over 500 sites in Texas. Officially recorded them on my own. This is a hobby. So.
And we couldn't pull off the professional work we do without people like Mark. I absolutely promise you that. I'm going to run down this real quick. This is a real general, like 5-sentence overview of what would be hundreds of pages of information from, let's call it the middle 18th century, 17 somethings, okay? There was an ethnographer named John Swanton in the about 100 years ago now. He published a book going through all these records and talked about the Caddo towns in East Texas. There were something like 12 to 15 of them. I'm absolutely not in any way convinced that the list that he presented was comprehensive. I think there might have been more. They range from 200 to a couple of thousand people in each one. Most of them around 1,000. Most of them in that range. 2,000 and 200 were pretty extreme big and small. And the key to remember is that when the DeSoto expedition came through here, it started a massive pandemic that killed huge numbers of people. We think that expedition throughout the southeastern United States cut the population in half. Now, that was the first, but not the last thing that happened to them before the census count. Okay, it's commonly said that the most common final date we see in East Texas archaeological site is 1500 AD because that's when they died. All right, so you get it. Swanton and others talk about how they were structured. Each of these towns, nearly everybody was an independent household. It's kind of like a nuclear family, might be a couple generations. They were farmers, they were hunters, and a bunch of other things. And the one male ruler, it would be the wrong word, but it's close enough. If you want to call him a chief, you're on target. It's called a Shanisi. He's in charge of the town. And there were at least 3 different confederacies where they bonded together into bigger units. And there would be the Shanisi of Town A, the Shanisi of Town B, and the Grand Shanisi of Town C, who was sort of in charge of all of them. And he had a lot of power, we see from ethno-historic reports. He had so much power that when he told the Spanish to get the hell out, they left immediately. And they sent a bunch of guys following them back to San Antonio, just to ensure that they made it all the way securely. And of course that leads to a lost cannon and river story south of us, and people are looking all over for it. So most of them were farmers. I've got a couple of those things. Sorry, I'm klutzy. I should have brought one more thing.
While he's fooling with that, anybody got a question?
Yeah. Come up with a question.
When you're looking for these sites, how do you recognize one?
Oh, that's a good
I
question.
mean, there's not a teepee sitting out front, like in the movies.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
It's a good question.
And in these Texas, things don't last long, It just, if you lay something out there, it rots in a few years, it's gone. So really, the only things that we got that are left are pottery and stone tools and making of stone tools. The rest of it is pretty well gone. They didn't build stone structures, they built wooden structures. They built these small mounds. We keep talking about a mound. And actually a mound is just a pile of dirt. And some of them can be huge. But most of them are the size of this room or so, maybe not any higher than that. And they were basically used for ceremonial purposes. The big guy, you go in a courtroom, the judge is sitting up. And all the way through history, you look up to people. And so they built these mounds, and probably the chief, or whatever you're going to call it, lived on this mound. And holler when you get ready.
You just keep going.
So anyway, back to your,
third main screen right here. Nobody else has something else with.
and of course in East Texas now, everything is pine trees or coastal fields. You don't have, used to when I grew up, we had a lot of plowed fields. I could go out in fields and walk, and pick up arrowheads and stuff like that. That's pretty hard to do anymore. When I do surveys, in other words, if I'm doing a pipeline survey or something like that, you can't see anything. There's nothing visible on top of the ground, so we rely on what we call shovel test. I dig a little post hole size holes in the ground and screen the dirt to see if there's anything there. And that's basically how we determine. Now, what you're going to find, if we walk in and say this room was the side of a Caddo Indian house or village, you're going to find bits of broken pottery. You're going to find some flakes of flint or chert or whatever you want to call it, stone stuff. And that's all you're going to find. So that's, the pottery is the main giveaway on Caddo, because they made lots of pots, they broke lots of pots, and you'll find lots of pottery around these sites.
And I'm trying to get to my set.
Now, if you go back and do more thorough investigations to start digging some, you can find remnants where they built the house, where if you dig a hole in the ground to set a post, that stain remains there.
Yeah.
And maybe they had a hearth there. You can see discolored soil, and ash and stuff like that. you can start to find some things like that. But if you're just out piddling around, the pottery is going to be the main thing that's key to finding a Caddo site. You know, just like you find an old historic site, you know, there'll be glass there, you know, and some stoneware, and maybe some iron, you know. But that's how you find it. So.
Did they have burial mounds?
They had mounds that used for different purposes. Some of them were burial mounds. Most of them were not. Most of them were just ceremonial houses, and what they did, they make this mound of dirt, build a house on it. And for some reason or other, after a period of time, don't know whether the rooter died or the house got decayed or what, they would burn the house, and then they would put some fresh dirt on it and rebuild again. So the mound is a succession of houses. And, but there are burial mounds, but not many. And we're kind of on the really western edge of the mound building. This mound building was more to the east of the Mississippi people. We're kind of really on the edge. We're really on the edge of the Caddo. You know, you go not many miles that way, you get to Post Oak Flats, you run out of pine trees and you run out of Caddo real quick. I mean, they lived in the Piney Woods region and not in the Blacklands, so we're really right on the edge.
Did they go north up into Oklahoma?
There's the Caddo were in the Piney Woods areas of southwest Arkansas, northwest Louisiana, Oklahoma, southwest Oklahoma, and northeast Texas. You know, that Piney Woods.
Yeah, architects.
Yeah, there you go.
A little bigger area than that.
Yeah.
But
So it
you
goes
know,
down to Nacogdoches, right?
Yeah.
and I'm sure they ventured out on the plains occasionally hunting and various things like that, but didn't live out there. Something about that, they liked these tiny woods, and that's where they were.
You're doing great. I was doing that. So, well, I've got a couple of websites just to show you real quick. So this is the Caddo Nation website. And if you, I know I'm being klutzy with this PowerPoint today. I'll tell you why. It's because I got this weird extra screen and it's you know, doing things nobody ever supposed to face up to. But I will give you guys this PowerPoint. So if anybody wants to take it home, turn it on, click on the same links, you get the same websites, okay? Real easy. So they're up in Oklahoma at, what's the town? They're in
Binger,
Oklahoma.
out west of Oklahoma City.
And they have a governmental process, they have a tribal council. Today, they're organized like all Native American tribes because of what was called the Native American Reorganization Act. And they have a tribal council and a tribal chairman, and imagine it to be pretty parallel to a mayor and a city council anywhere. Okay. Basically the same thing. And of course they fight, you know. So there's always one side that takes over or throws everybody out. The other side takes over, they throw everybody out. You have to, as soon as you're on their good side, those people are gone, you have to start over. They have some creative people involved, including this guy. His name is Chase Earls. Here's some of Chase's stuff. I hope you can, but I can't afford it. Because some of Chase's work right now is being shown at the Dallas Museum of Art with their new Caddo show, okay? And he's a featured artist at DMA right now, which means that prices went up again. And it's really beautiful, beautiful work, okay? I think, here's where we get challenging again.
Did they have schools? It seemed like I read where they had schools.
In the past or today?
In the past.
No.
No?
No, I wouldn't think. I mean, when we talk about, say, the Aztecs living in big cities with like square blocks and areas that were devoted for extended families, that they may have had something like a school, but really nobody else did. It was homeschooling, as we call it today.
Did the Indians like carve out stones and make kind of like sharp points to kill animals?
Oh, that's a question for Mr. Walters.
What was the question?
Did they make arrow points?
Did they make airplanes? Yes, ma'am. And we're very good at it.
They had all different sizes of stone,
Yeah.
for large animals,
So many of their,
some was small for the smaller.
Well, now that's a question for Mr. Walters.
okay. But the thing is about it, what's interesting is that the arrowheads that you find here, the stone doesn't come from here.
That's what.
Because East Texas doesn't have very good stone. We have sandstone, a little bit of petrified wood, which you can sometimes do something with, a few plasticine gravel deposits, but basically we don't have good stone. So it was kind of like being in the computer age without electricity. You know, you were in the stone age, but you didn't have no stone. And really the Caddo, by the time the Caddo came along, they weren't using evidently bows and arrows that much, because we just don't find that many arrow points on these sites. Predominantly, if you go on the site and start collecting artifacts, 90% of it will be pottery, 10% might be stone stuff. They just weren't using. Now, of course, you can make a bow and arrow without putting a stone tip on it. You know, you can just shoot a stick. Or maybe put a piece of bone on it or something. Where to go.
While I still have it working. I apologize. I've never messed with this computer in this situation before. I gotta tell you, this is what I do for a living. So I'm getting a little embarrassed. But if the speakers work, and I've been told they will, here's an old.
Hello, Kumakia Cowan Hut. My name is Chase Cowan Hut Earls. I'm a member of the Caddo Nation, and I make traditional pottery and even contemporary pieces, modern interpretations of our culture.
There's more to that if you want to look it up. The other person is a dear friend of ours, Michelle Rich, who's a former archaeologist who's now at the Dallas Museum of Art. Let's see if we can make this work right one more time. And there we go. It's actually starting to work. The person who is probably the originator of the Caddo art traditions that we see today, because all of these crafts were lost, right? These people were not doing well when they got kicked out of Texas and were in Oklahoma. It was a pretty tough situation on Native Americans everywhere. But one of the originators is a woman named Jerry Redcorn. And this is Jerry, yeah, there she is. She's a, what do we call them? Person who speaks her mind and will not stop until you make it. Good luck on trying. We had her at UT Tyler, well, now almost 2 years ago, and she just took over a whole thing. And because all the other Native American artists there look up to her, she's like, they gave it to her. Everybody was talking but Jerry's work is portfolios. She basically was the person who recreated these crafts. So my point is, Caddo folks are alive, well, and doing some pretty interesting stuff today. We'll tell you how you can run into them if I don't mess this up on this next one. Let's see this one. I think I've got it now. There we go. Another thing you can do, there's some Caddo people in front of the mound at Caddo Mounds State Historic Site. You know where that is, right? Alto. About an hour south, about 2 hours south of you, about an hour south of Tyler. Okay, it's right on the Neches River. It is the one big public space where you can look and see and get involved with Caddo things, and the Caddo people often come from Oklahoma to come be part of things there. But I don't know if you know about this, but they had a little issue there a while back. Yeah, I think I heard you say that. Oh, no, we're not there yet. Here they are. At Caddo Mounds, I just grabbed a couple of these photographs. The point here is to let you know how much an archaeologist can learn. When you go out and you say, oh, there might be a burial there or something, we'll dig a big hole, rip it up. And you got a pot. And we go, thank you. Thank you very much. If you were to excavate this carefully, these are from the 1940 excavations at Caddo Mounds. And look what they found. A house. More houses. Right?
And those holes are posts where the post, they dug a hole to put the post in, and that remains in the soil for a long time at this discoloration cool.
No, it completely, he nailed it. And it's a discoloration. You gotta be a pro working with a trowel. I'm not good enough at it. I'll see it, I'll not be sure what I did, you know, and I work on buildings that are made of stone. They're easy. You get all the dumb rocks out of the way, there's a wall. But here, you have to be very, very careful. Look at these discolorations, and you might not even notice them or notice there's a pattern. But if you're real good at it, you start seeing the patterns, you start seeing the discolorations, and what you find are where houses were built on top of each other for maybe hundreds of years. Okay. And this is a stepped excavation into a mound, and you can see the, you can just see how the layers go, and that means, that's because they were building with baskets, dumping baskets of dirt. That's a lot of work. You know, I find it real impressive that Maya people built stone pyramids. Digging up dirt and carrying it is more impressive to me. It's a lot of work. And this is what happens if you do it wrong. I hit it twice. So that's what happens if you do it wrong. The Alamy sign over there means that I do not have legal rights to show you this because I stole it from the web. Yeah, so don't tell. But look, they've just been ripping the site to pieces, and they've gotten some cool stuff out of it, probably, I guess. But we don't know what we know about Caddo Mounds. And the problem with Caddo Mounds now is this. Little issue there a couple of years ago. A tornado destroyed the place during a public event and destroyed the museum. And people were hurt. One of our friends was in a wheelchair the rest of his life because he was there helping his wife, who was in charge of the event. So were a bunch of cattle people and so forth. By the way, if you're going to destroy something, do it when the ledge is in session, because within the next week they funded the new museum. It is set to be open about 12 months from now, and we're tying something into that.
Are they rebuilding the structures? Or?
Rebuilding the structures of the museum?
Yeah, well, I thought they had built like a shelter and things.
There was a grass hut that we built several years ago, reconstruction of a cattle house.
Yeah.
And the guy that was responsible for building it was sitting inside the fire, and the tornado blew the house away and blew him out in the field. And he survived, but no, it was gone. It's gone.
I didn't know if they were going to rebuild that.
We're going to plan it. They're right now collecting materials to rebuild it. So.
I went there last year and it was just the trailer.
Yeah. Did you meet a guy in there? Was it a guy or a woman? It's one or the other.
Yeah. There was a lady in there.
That's her husband who was.
Oh, okay.
I went there the week before it happened. I went there the week before it happened.
I was driving back from Albuquerque, and it was crap weather all the way from Albuquerque. When I got home, the first thing my wife said is, I gotta tell you this.
So sad.
It was terrible. But anyway, they're looking forward to and there you go. That's a little close up. So here's some legal stuff. Let's talk about this a little bit. Mark already covered a lot of it, but that's okay. When we start talking about archaeology in Texas and what you can do, what you can't do, what the legal stuff arrangements are, they fall basically under two laws. The Environmental Protection Act, because the Environmental Protection Act covers both natural resources and cultural resources. And while the archaeology is a small part of it, in fact, it often is a more expensive part of it because archaeology is more complicated. We have to kind of go look for every important site buried under the ground where the biology people can go out and in a couple of days to sample the trees and do, they do it much more quickly. And the historic and the Native American Grave Protection Act. I'll tell you what's important about that in a second. But what EPA does is it creates what's called the State Historic Preservation Office. And in Texas, that is the Texas Historical Commission. Now they're in charge of enforcing the laws, overseeing reports, and facilitating what people want to do about, say, finding sites in their property. Okay. As Mark said, you find something on your property, don't be afraid to call these people, because I don't know, like every landowner I've ever met is worried that they're going to come out and take their land. They cannot do that. Okay? They simply cannot. There's no way. All right? So don't be afraid of them. They're actually pretty nice people, and they try to be helpful. If you call them, you know what they're going to do? They're going to give you Mark's number. So skip them. Go to Mark. The Native American Grave Protection Act is a little bit different. So all of our ancestors, I guess for the most part, are in cemeteries. And in some way or another, they're protected legally. Okay? You can't build a building on top of a cemetery. You can't run a road through a cemetery. Even small family plots all over East Texas, you can't do that. And we don't want them to. Well, when I abandoned my house and it falls down because nobody cared, I abandoned it. You can go do what you're going to with it. When I buried my grandmother, I didn't abandon her. I placed her there because that's where I wanted her to stay forever. And the Native American Grave Protection Act basically says that that's what Native American burials are about too. They intended her to be there, they didn't abandon her or dump her. So it's the difference between the car I left at your house for 6 years was abandoned, okay, it's yours. Or you taking the one out of my driveway that I'm driving, no, that's mine. Okay, so these burials are not abandoned. The trick is that you see the pot over there in the corner? We've never found, at least knowingly found, a pot that was not from a burial. So the legal folks, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, have prosecuted people for buying and selling these things because they come from burials and it falls under NAGPRA. All right. So if it's on your property, it's yours. There are people in Central Texas where sites are kind of big minimum sites who have sold digging rights, just like you might sell grazing rights or hunting rights or leasing them, right? So I'm not advocating you do that, but I'm trying to make the point is, if it's on your property, it's yours. And it's safe from anybody in any government taking it away from you. That's just not going to happen. All right, let's do something else. What I'm going to do now is let you ask you if you had any questions, but you've been doing that, so do you have any questions? You guys have any questions? No. I like your shirt. You know why I like your shirt? He's wearing a National Geographic shirt. You know why I like his shirt? Because I'm going to spend a lot of their money next summer. They've given us a grant to excavate a building in Belize that we think has murals on it. So we're pretty excited about that. And that's why I'm not coming to your house every time you call me. Yes, sir.
Well, so you said that they had little, pretty much individual house sites all scattered around. But what kind of a organization, or what was their lifestyle structure like? What did they do on a communal basis? Was each little family unit independent like we are, or were they a community?
Okay, like we are, yeah, I think that's basically right. Is that, so each family is basically independent the same way each family today is.
That's our interpretation, but
Yeah.
we don't really know.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we came up here to talk about the Caddo in Wood County, and that's about it. That's all. We don't know much. I mean, we really don't know much. You know, I can go out and pick up pottery and do things. People can collect things like this, but we don't know much about how they live because they didn't leave a written history. So the Spanish and the French came in here in the 16th century or whatever, and they documented some of the things that they were seeing about the Caddo, but that was from their own interpretation. Whether it's right or not, I don't know. But, you know, they were recording the Caddo at that point. What were the Caddo like 400 years ago? We don't know. We just don't really know very much about it. We can do this archaeology and we can learn, you know, and archaeology's changed. When I was a kid, archaeology was pretty much no more than collecting things like this to put in a museum to show people. We weren't interested in learning about how people lived, the lives they lived. We didn't have the tools. I mean, we just barely had, you know, now we've got sophisticated tools. We can study pottery and see what they were cooking in it, residue analysis. We do all these fancy things, you know, that we couldn't do a few years ago. And I'm sure in 50 years they'll look at what we're doing now and say, my goodness, that was, you know, so we just basically do not know.
One of the fancy things that we got is LiDAR. Do you know what LiDAR is? You do?
Yes.
All right.
I
You
watch
did it.
National Geographic.
But now that you said that you know what it is, you got to tell everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a machine that you, like you're mowing the grass, but it does it like a ground penetrating radar kind of thing.
It is ground penetrating radar. It's not LiDAR.
Oh.
But that's an important toy for us.
But they can do it now like from an airplane.
So
over
you just gave me two
area.
things to talk about, all right?
Okay.
All right.
Good for me.
Ground penetrating radar. The picture with all those buried buildings, ground penetrating radar should be able to pick those up. Okay, and you do it just like a lawnmower. It goes over the ground. We did it up at Lake Bob Sandlin. What's the state park? Lake Bob Sandlin State Park. So we went up there for the Parks and Wildlife people, and we did a ground penetrating radar survey of the cemetery that they had up there, and we found like, I don't remember, like 25, 30 more burials. So if you go up there today, they have a new fence around a bigger area. That's because everything in there we know had people in it. We didn't know that before we did that. That's really important. Thank you for stealing my thought. No, you didn't really. The other one is LiDAR. It's a laser mapping process, and you fly an airplane over an area, and you bombard the ground with lasers, and it will give you this incredibly detailed texture map. I would just say it looks like a photograph. Okay. We haven't done it yet in East Texas. But the only place that runs it for us, I'll get right to you, is the National Center for National Center for Aerial Laser Mapping at the University of Houston. And because they're in Houston, they do practice runs over here all the time. They work throughout the world, but the airplane's in Houston. Let's go test stuff. Where do they go?
Yeah, all right.
And we gave them a list of a bunch of places we wanted LiDAR of, and there's a guy named Juan. And when Juan gets around to it, he's going to give us the LiDAR of Caddo sites.
Cool.
According to my iPhone, they have been doing some at Poverty Point.
That is true.
So a lot of detailed maps
Yeah.
and the steps going up to the mountains.
So,
A lot of interesting stuff.
according to your iPhone and other things, Louisiana beat the crap out of us on this one. They mapped the whole state.
What?
They mapped the whole state with LiDAR. Now, new LiDAR is higher quality, but they have the whole state. And we're begging for handouts.
Can you see roads with that?
Can you see roads with that? You can see the yellow line. You can see the potholes. One of the uses of LiDAR is to map potholes to plan for road construction in the future. You can see your license plate number. Okay? So you can also see if there happen to be causeways or dugout places, or if, just because we're in the middle of a forest and we can't see very well because there's crap on our faces everywhere, if there's a swamp 20 feet away. All those kinds of features can be just pop up on us. That's also something we can use.
So you say your display looks similar to a photograph, an aerial photograph?
Say it again?
Your display that you see, your end result?
It looks like a
similar?
black and white aerial photograph.
Okay.
If you will, I don't have it available to me right this second, but after we get done, if you'd like, I'll pull some up. I've got them on this computer. Just show them right to you, show you exactly what I'm talking about. And you'll get the idea right away. Just looking at Google Earth and Caddo Mounds, which are Caddo Mounds State Historic Site, I'm seeing proximity to other kinds of environmental zones that when I'm standing there, I never saw. Because, I'm this tall and there are trees, and, but when you're looking at it from an aerial perspective, you see all kinds of things. Yeah, so you bet. What else? What, you gotta have more questions for Mark because he's good at it.
Is there any chance that they ever were
She
involved
had
in
her-
any battles?
She had her hand up first.
Oh,
She had her
okay.
hand up
Sorry.
first. You know what kind of trouble we get into when we get in the way of women.
Is the pottery that you find, the shards, are they glazed and painted, or are they the primitive clay?
I brought a sack full of just miscellaneous shards. I'll pour them out afterwards, but yes, they used all different types of decorative techniques. They didn't have kilns, so their pottery was low temperature fired pottery. Didn't ever get to China consistency, but it's hard. And it depended on, they had utilitarian pots, for everyday cooking and so like that. And then they have what we call fine wares, which were nice, really fancy pots that we don't really know what they were used for, but they show up in burials, they were put in burials with people. And of course they had slips they put on there, used red hematite, put a slip on there, but they didn't ever get the temperatures to make glazes and stuff like that. But the pottery was very beautiful. Very beautiful.
Did they use a coil method, or was it?
Yeah, the coil. Yeah, rolled it out like a cigar and form it up. And you can see those coil marks on the broken pottery, how it's made up. And they were very fine potters. They did really, really good. And the thing about it is, pottery is like automobiles. You can tell time with pottery. Where if you show me a picture of 57 Chevrolet, or Cadillac with fins, I can put you the date on that.
Or if you saw a guy wearing a shirt with Roy Rogers on it, you knew it was not 1935.
But anyway, we use this pottery, the pottery that you have here, we don't have in Smith County. You have different designs up here, you know, different ways of making the pottery and stuff, because these people, just like today, different groups have different ideas and stuff around. And your group, huh?
And different clays.
And different clays, yeah, and different ways of making pottery. You know, they didn't just get clay and water and stomp out a pot. It was almost like a religion. If you know potters today, I mean, the clay is sacrament, but they use tempering agents in there to keep the pots from exploding when they fired them. And one of the most common tempering agents they used was they would take old pottery and grind it up. This is called grog, and they mix that into clay. And then for some reason or other, in parts of the country, they use burned bones. You find burned flakes of bone in the pottery. Up on the Red River, you find mussel shell, which you don't find here. So each group had its own way of doing things, their own idea of what's designed and stuff like that, and it varies. Even house designs, you know, you see the circular house. Well, in some parts of the Caddo area, they built rectangular houses, you know, and then south of Sabine, they had circular houses. Up in this part of the world, you find a house that it wasn't real uncommon that they plastered it with mud for, you know, who knows, protection maybe, maybe to paint something on. But you get south of the Sabine, you don't find that. So it's, the Caddo were not all one people, you know, but here's the thing was, what glue held these people all together to make them all one kind of people. Of course, Caddo, you know, that's a name that we gave them. We don't know what they call themselves. So, anyway, I rambled.
Now, sir, it's your.
Is there any evidence that they ever fought with each other?
You know, I always talk about how peaceful the Caddo were, and they evidently were, because we know of this virtually I know of one instance of a Caddo barrel that had an arrow point embedded in its pelvis. That is the only instance I know, and that could have been hunting, actually. I mean, I don't know word, but evidently they were very peaceful people.
Maybe they're just filming the movie.
But we don't find evidence of violence in the graves. You know, I mean, people had their head bashed down and stuff like that. So,
since these people were separated but united in ways, was there a lot of intermarriage, or did they go out? Do we know if they went out to their next door neighbor?
That's a wonderful question, not one we can really give you an answer to for all the kind of obvious reasons. Whenever we get those questions, and how would we know? We would know by knowing what families did in the 1800s, 1700s. We just don't have the information. I've got to assume that they did things like a Shanisi's daughter might marry a Shanisi's son. There might be there's a social stratification like that, so they're going to kind of, like European royalty does, keep it in the family. I don't take that very far. Because the idea of these people behaving like European royalty is just kind of laughed off. So we're just not really sure what the answer is.
She's got a question. She's had a question for a while right here.
I'm sorry, where?
Right here.
Oh.
No, she right here.
You do?
Okay.
Go
I was
ahead.
wondering too, when you talk about everybody had their own style, can you see trading in pottery?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you would know who they traded with.
Better question,
and where
mostly with each other, by the way. But we've also found some southwestern pottery here. We found jade, I'm sorry, not jade, jade, Central America. Turquoise here. So, no, I mean, not tons, but it pretty clearly was a significantly important exotic object. Like, you know, diamonds are a significantly important exotic object for us. That makes sense. One of the things people are trying to do is use compositional analysis of turquoise. You can get that through a device called X-ray fluorescence device to tell you what the composition is. And try to compare it with sources in the Southwest so we'd know where it came from. Also obsidian from the southwest shows up here, so it's volcanic glass, so using projectile points and such.
And we also get shell from the Gulf.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that comes in this area, they traded that. You know, there was a lot of trade going on, but you had to realize, you know, there was no horses then. You know, you walked or went by a boat if you had a stream, but it was, you know, yeah. But I'm sure there were probably traders that moved among these people, you know, and brought things and stuff like that. But again, we don't really know.
If you go back to the mural, there are traders depicted in there that's sitting around. They're people who don't look like anybody else in the mural, sitting around holding stuff. And the idea is they're from someplace else and they're trading things in the community. Again, how, and the word trade is kind of it's loaded, right? Somebody says they traded with people. Does that mean they had big ships and ports? No. It means something different than what we think of generally. You had a question.
Anybody from mural ground is,
I'm sorry, say that again?
mural ground,
Hundreds.
Burial ground.
Yeah.
the reason I was asking that question, Tommy Cole used to be a cop in Washington, I was born and raised, and right at the end of Blackhawk, I used to work on it when I was young. And Tommy Cole was living out one time and showed me the mural ground, and he trusted like full of pots and stuff. And well, it's been 20 years since I've been down there. I was with a friend down the beach, and we stopped on the bank one day. And I used to remember that. And we could find the relatives down there.
Sure.
And I guess I let him have, I hadn't got it yet. And that's where they use like Portugal, so they started deer holes.
Yeah.
And made holes.
Yeah. So, let me say two things about what you said. First of all, if you ever go to the Drake County Museum, they have materials exhumed from a Caddo cemetery, where there are a couple of hundred, more than that, burials. Couple of thousand burials.
Yeah. Well, no, a couple hundred barrels.
Yeah, a couple of thousand pots and artifacts.
Yeah. There was a looter, and I use the term looter because there are people who actively go out and target these cemeteries and dig them up to sell the goods. And you can buy them on eBay. I mean, you can go on eBay, they're for sale. But they target them. And there was this gentleman that lived south of Tyler that was notorious, and he bragged several years ago that he had dug his 1,000th Caddo burial. And that's disturbing. Very disturbing. But the Caddo had these little hamlets, and they would have a little family cemetery. And up in this part of the world, some of these cemeteries are pretty big. They have about 50 more people. Down in south of the Sabine, you know, half a dozen would be a large cemetery. But anyway, they have these cemeteries, and they use them over time, you know. But for some reason or other, these cemeteries are organized. They had some way of marking these burials, because very seldom do you see where one intrudes in another. They're in rows. So some way or another they kept up where these things are, but we don't know how. You don't find a rock there or a sign of a post that they put. We don't know how they marked them. They did mark them and kept up with them, but they buried people with goods. You know, a man would have his personal goods, his bow and arrows and his pipes, and the lady, of course, would have her cooking pots and stuff, and you know, because they thought, you know, there was an afterlife and they were sending people on. But like I say, the sad thing is that people recognize these things are worth money, and they dig them up, you know, and sell them, which is unfortunate.
Maybe get those holes like that one photograph. And the thing is, it's not worth that much money. The guy that Mark was talking about lived across the street from my kid's middle school, and he died real poor. All right? I mean, I swear. This was the worst house. You said in Tyler, but you meant White House? Yeah. This is the worst falling down shack in town, all right? And right next to it is a church where my kid was at Cub Scouts. And we were there, and he didn't have any electricity. All right, so I'm not, I mean, like really, this was, you can still see it, the family's been trying to sell it. That's it. Yes, sir.
What were the main crops that they survived on?
You want
Well, the agriculture had started long about this time. And of course, people have been domesticating plants for agriculture for a long period of time. And unfortunately, in this part of the world, we didn't have a lot of good crops like corn and stuff like that to develop. Corn developed in Central America from a grass, and they domesticated it and eventually get the corn that we use now. So they were using what we call ditch weeds, weeds that have seeds on them, starch, oil, the seeds. But then they eventually started, and we don't know how it got here. That's one of our research questions is, corn originated in Central America, it shows up here. How? Amazon? We don't know how it got here. And it's embarrassing that we can't answer that question. But right now, we cannot. But corn showed up here, time of Christ or a little earlier, and people started growing it. Now, how much importance they placed on it, we don't really know. I mean, they had it, they had some squash, they had some beans, but was that their main crops? We don't know. They were utilizing a lot of native stuff. Hickory nuts were very important. We found tons of charred hickory nut shells and stuff. But, they were farming, but our idea of farming now was certainly what they were doing.
And one of the problems that Mark was getting to there is that corn doesn't leave you a lot of evidence when you 1,000 years later. We get pollen and we get what are called phytoliths, which are glass structures inside cell walls. And you can find these in samples microscopically. We don't, I mean, there's a whole group of people that do that for the rest of the world. We don't stare into microscopes all day long. But just imagine, if we got corn, pollen, and phytolith going back 1,000 years, we're talking about having a few. I don't know how many we have in the area, but it would be a few hundred, something like that would be a lot, covering all of those years and all of this space. It's just hard to find something that's preserved so you can.
We know from dental records when people start eating corn, it's highly, it's got a lot of sugar in it, starch, stuff sticks to your teeth. Start having a lot of tooth problems. Before they started using corn, people's teeth were like, ivory, they could crack hickory nuts. But after that, we start seeing a lot of cavities and a lot of problems. So the corn was not a blessing to them particularly, it also had pesticides in it.
One thing we have from historic records is about their green corn ceremony, which is our Thanksgiving. So when crops become, when it's the harvest season, everybody grows anything everywhere, has celebrations and at the end of the harvest season. So when the corn becomes green, you'd walk along and you'd snap it, and it would hang down and it would dry there, and that's what you serve. But when it became green, it was also basically the harvest time. They throw big celebrations. And what's been described as they go out hunting deer, they cut up deer meat, they put corn in, and have like a big communal, when you talk about other people's food, it always sounds kind of disgusting until you say that I had some crushed up corn flakes with the mammary secretions of another animal for breakfast this morning. So we can make ours sound pretty disgusting too, but it had just a bunch of stuff in it as a big smell. So we know from those reports that corn was important to them, but as Mark said, it was important enough to be what they ate every day.
Well, they can say these people have been existing here for thousands and thousands of years, you know, I mean, we were talking on the way up, you know, there's new developments every day, you know. Pretty much the thought has been up until this point that America was settled around 13,000 years ago, you know, after the last ice age, the glaciers, you know, retreated and allowed people to come across and come into the Americas, and then about 13,000 years ago, and well, that was, we were pretty good with that. Well, here recently, drought in New Mexico, they've got a lake bed out there, they've got footprints in the mud that's fossilized or whatever, and they've got good radiocarbon dates on these that show 20,000 plus years. So we've got to go back into the drawing board here and kind of rethink things. You know,
We only missed about 10,000 years.
but you know, like I say, people have been living here. You know, you and I, you know, we use native things. I eat poke salads, you know, and there's the old sawbriar smilex, you know, makes those big old roots underneath that you make pipes out of. You know, that's a good starch content. You can dry those things and pound them and make, you know, a flour, you know, to make bread with. And, you know, they were living for a, you know, long time, had plenty of things to live on and do well, you know.
That didn't waste nothing.
Didn't have a waste. Yes, ma'am.
Were buffalo prevalent in East Texas?
No.
Okay.
Buffalo are a plains, grassy eating animal. So they were not in the forests of East Texas. However, one thing that we've seen some ethnographic reports of it in the fall, cattle people would send young men hunting buffalo to bring back hides and stuff in the fall. Which apparently was done occasionally.
So what's the
With
oldest
other people who lived in the plains not very happy with them showing up.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Then you're fine.
What's the oldest known artifact y'all found around from the Caddo culture?
Oldest known artifact found here probably would be Clovis points. And it's named after the town Clovis, New Mexico. They date to about 12,000 years ago. And for the longest time, we don't usually get a new date every time we find something. If I've got a 57 Chevy and I see another 57 Chevy, I don't have to go date it, right? So every time anybody finds a Clovis point, they generally are not dated anymore, and it's often hard to find something to date with them. So we just understand that to be about 11,500 to 12,000 years old.
But that can't be identified as Caddo, right?
Oh, I see your point. Good point. So the problem is when you decide that somebody is a particular group. And the usual litmus test here is when we start seeing the native pottery. From then on, we see a continuity of pottery right up to the end. So that gets us to what, 700 AD earlier? Yeah. Okay. But the problem is, at 650, just because somebody wasn't making pottery doesn't mean they weren't getting cattle. Yeah. Think of cars. Cars are sort of the American cultural item, right? I'm telling you right now, there are still Americans before the Model T. Okay? So even though we don't find cars in the archaeological record, doesn't mean that's not the same people. All right, but so that's kind of the answer to your question. Somebody else has a question.
Thank you. You had a question.
I was just going to comment about the buffalo. As you said, we're on the edge. We're in the transition zone between prairie, Blackland Prairie, and Piney Woods.
Yep.
And, you know, some folks will tell you, well, the buffalo came through a cave. But my understanding is that the young men went west and north.
Yeah, because it's just when you go looking around these forests, there's not much for buffalo to eat. You know, that's just what it comes down to.
And I wonder if there was not conflict between those Indians that followed
Well, wouldn't you expect? Yeah. Sure.
And the ones that came out of the woods to see if they could get a little bit behind.
You're turning on my territory now. Yes, I think I wouldn't like it that you showed up. Yes, sir.
Good segue. What do we know about how the Caddo, their attitude about the Indians that were pushed west by American settlement on the East Coast in the 1700s?
I'm not sure. Did you hear the question?
Well, I think I did, about,
How do they feel about people like the
Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Delaware, the hundreds of people that got, but the Caddo were so disorganized by that period of time. I mean, their populations had been decimated, their whole social structure destroyed. So I think it was just, everybody was in the same pot. They didn't have any way of handling it, I don't think, because they were in the same shape.
That makes tons of sense.
The Caddo, 1830s or something like that,
the last ones were moved to the Brazos Reservation in 1857. There were only 50 people there or something.
Yeah, we moved them, and we forcibly moved them to a reservation down in Waco. And then our good governor learned that they were there, and he was an advocate of the only good Indian was a dead Indian. So he sent the army up there to do away with them. And the Indian agent gathered them up and took them across the Red River into Oklahoma to preserve them.
But again, at that time, we were talking about maybe, my number in my mind is 57 people, but something in that range, right? We're not talking about a big crowd of folks.
The last battle to remove Indians from this area was in 1839 when they killed Chief Bull there, just south of Sabine River.
But see, he wasn't a Caddo, he was a Cherokee.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, that was a sad moment in our history that we don't cover in history books very much.
When the Caddo resettled in Oklahoma, did they thrive then once they were up there?
No.
No.
They're like all Native American groups. They have a lot of problems. A lot of problems with alcoholism and so on and so on and so on. And they're discriminated against.
The issue with alcoholism and drugs and that sort of thing is in part because they're discriminated against. They're small. They don't have a lot of money. Years ago, I was involved with a film series, and we did films on the Alabama Coshada people in southeast Texas and so forth. We got to the Kickapoo on the border, and they said, yeah, it's okay, you can do that. You can do a documentary on us, but we want something for us. And then the question was, what do you want? And it's the only film in Kickapoo ever filmed by Kickapoo people with the support of RAV people. And the topic is how glad these young people are that they got over paint sniffing as an anti-paint sniffing PR thing for the internally in the tribe. And if you really want to know, Walmart Gold is apparently the good one. So yeah, it's pretty real stuff. Pretty horrifying watching that film even today when I watch these people talk about what they went through before they got clean. Yeah, I've got a couple more slides. We have plenty of time for questions after, so gather them up, okay? But I'm kind of watching people get a little wiggly. So let's get it.
We've got some cookies and stuff. You want to take a break?
We have door prizes too, we need to.
Well, I don't know, it's up to you. You want cookies or you want Mick Jagger? Do you know who that is? I'm just thinking of him as a Halloween monster.
Can we do the door prizes?
You can do whatever you want.
Before the refreshment.
Of course, go right ahead. You take it over. What's that? Coming right up. Coming up.
It's not a new.
So this is the Texas Historical Commission website. And you can go there and you can look up all sorts of things about archaeology. You can look at things like historic preservation and sites that are managed in San Antonio.
Exploration.
Yes, okay, they did, SMU did some work on Lake Fork Creek.
Oh, they're coming right up.
They
So,
did.
two things that happen locally, and they happen at the University of Texas at Tyler.
Otherwise, it would be a looter.
There's the annual East Texas Archaeological Conference. We do that the last weekend of February. We're supposed to shut it down this year. We're going to restart it next year in a little odd way because it's not actually going to be February. And then every fourth year, we do it with the Caddo Conference. And the Caddo Conference are archaeologists, Native Americans, historians, held in each of the 4 states. So it's circles. It comes back to Texas. It comes with us, and we put it together with the East Texas Conference in February. And this is the Caddo Conference website.
Yes, it was.
And this is the website for the East Texas
Yeah,
Archaeology.
and that's the trouble about this stuff. Dig it up.
Were you at the last one?
When was it? I haven't been for 2 years.
Oh, well, yeah, it hasn't been this year.
Yeah, I have.
For the Native Americans, the Cots and so forth, the people up front.
And
Okay,
Kathy.
that was it, yeah.
You know, I've got no qualms about it. I don't like something.
I went one year when Jerry Redhorn gave a plot to be auctioned off or.
That was like 2 years before, yeah. It was a different build, you bought it?
What are you gonna do? You know, well, you set them on the mantle and you run the case, and then you die and the kids split them up and then they get tired of it. Any information, you got them. You know, and that's all I'm interested in. Is the information. I mean, I just donated.
And the last organization I want to show you,
We can sit back down.
So far,
is the Texas Archaeological Society website. Now, they have an annual meeting and it moves around
that
Texas.
collection is being studied.
Guess where it's going to be this year? In Tyler. So we're going to host it. We're going to host it with the East Texas Archaeological Conference. We're going to bring in the Caddo. We'll bring Jerry back. We'll bring in the Caddo dancers. We'll bring in the Caddo craftsmen and so forth. So it's going to be a bit of fun. So
It's shirts.
the last thing I want to let you know that we're doing.
Yes, it's shirts.
I'm just going to pause just a second. So the last thing I want to tell you about is what we're doing at the
Y'all
Center.
listen a minute, I think we're gonna start back up again.
We did start. We're ready to finish. So at the Center for Social Science Research at the University of Texas at Tyler, we have received a collection of a few over 200 pots from Caddo burials, from legitimate excavations of Caddo sites. The donor's anonymous, but if you really ask, I'd tell you his name is Mark Walters. And you know what's wonderful that happens when you start this stuff? When you start this stuff, people get interested. So one of our students working on the collection, her neighbor heard about it and they gave her a couple of pots. And she brought them and donated them. And now we found out that that neighbor actually has another large collection and they're going to donate it to them. So what we're doing is we're building this repository of Caddo and materials for people forever. And what we're doing, I think, is pretty interesting. So, got to get back to this for a second. So this is a student named Dakota. And she's sitting in front of a computer, right? She's also sitting next to a scanner and a Caddo pot. And what we're doing is using 3D digital scanning. We started with a $2,000 device. We just acquired a $25,000 device. And we are building digital models of all of these pots. For what reasons? So we can get them out to you online maybe someday, so you can look at them if you're a legitimate scholar. We can get them to you. You don't have to come to us, they can go to you. And if they get broken, shattered, or destroyed, what have you, we got a record of them forever. And this is being done by, and we're also doing photogrammetry, which is 3D photographing. And I'm gonna turn it over to my assistant.
Librarian at Alba, and we have this book, but when I'm there.
Hello, my name is Katia Menkina, and I was given an amazing opportunity by Dr. Guderjan and Dr. Sills to become a staff researcher in the archaeology lab in the Department of Social Sciences at UT Tyler. Both the student workers and I work on preserving and documenting artifacts digitally for public accessibility. And my goal is to capture both the high geometry and full color information of archaeological artifacts, and to also search for efficient approaches to 3D imaging. And I will now show you technology software and equipment we use in the archaeology lab. The first software I will introduce is Next Engine Studio, which is actually the very first software I've ever used for preservation technology. The equipment it comes with is the 3D laser scanner, the auto drive platform, the gripper arm, and the measuring tape is also needed to measure the distance between the scanner and the artifact you are scanning. In terms of the auto drive platform and the gripper arm, it's really all about the size of the pot. Since this lovely Caddo pot is pretty big, we're gonna use the bigger platform. Next Engine Studio has the pot in the view of the scanner, and I input all the information I need to make the first scan. The two scans which are marked by a letter can now be trimmed and aligned. I trim anything around the pot and align the two scans together through the process of triangulation. Since I already aligned the scans, I move the right scan into my bracket scan, and you can see now that it's been extended, it's been put together. And now I would trim and align the rest of the scans I would make until I have a complete pot. Then I take a look at the polish features. I can look at the shaded view, which would give me a lot of information on the ridges and how well the pot came together. And afterwards, I would fuse the pot together, and that would give me a complete 3D scan. The second equipment that we use in the archaeology lab is photogrammetry, which is different from the 3D laser scanner. Instead of using lasers, we use camera for photogrammetry. So out of photos, we create the 3D model. Some of the equipment that's needed for photogrammetry is the Edges of Metashape software. We need the camera and the tripod. And tripod is important here to stabilize the camera for the pictures to come out clear. We use a tape measure. We usually use a turntable, and also sometimes we use the light box. My amazing research partner and I worked together on a 3D model of a steppe mammoth tooth from Russia. After we took the photos of the mammoth tooth, we uploaded it into the Edges of Metashape software, right down here. Next, we aligned the photos and turned them into a sparse cloud, which is not quite solid, as you can see. Then we went to the workflow feature and built a dense cloud of the same chunk. The dense cloud processing allows you to get a more defined 3D model. And then we trimmed all of the floating data around the object. Next, we pretty much did the entire process the exact same way for all of the groups of photos, groups or chunks of photos. After we have all of the groups that we need, we align all of them together. And by doing that, we would manually place markers on the corresponding points of the object. Next, we build a mesh under the workflow and then build a textured model for a complete 3D. And here's a textured mesh complete model. And as you can see, the color turned out really well, and you can see all of the ridges, edges, and all of the cracks of the mammoth tooth.
She chose the mammoth tooth because it was the most complicated object we could find to work with, and if she could pull it off with that, she could pull it off with any pot we had. Oh, I have one more thing. Oh, and I bet you're going, she sounds like a Yankee.
Hello, my name is Kati Menkina, and
Stop it. Who thought, where? Yeah, absolutely. Her English is so good because she's educated in Moscow. Her mother is a faculty member in literature. Her stepfather is a historian at Art University.
And I was given an amazing opportunity by Dr. Guderjan and Dr. Sills to become a staff researcher in the archaeology lab in the Department of Social Sciences at UT Tyler. Both the student workers and I work on preserving and documenting.
Sorry, that's the same one. You wanted this one.
The last but the most impressive preservation technology in our archaeology lab is the Artex Space Spider. It's what I'm currently studying, and I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to do so. But as you can see, compared to Next Engine, this is actually a handheld scanner. It's light, it has 5 cameras, and the cameras have different functions. Some cameras capture the texture of an artifact they're scanning, others capture the 3D aspect of the artifact as well. But what I would do is, it's currently in the preview mode and I can see it on the software over here, and I have my turntable here. But what I would typically do is I would direct the scanner right onto the pod, and I'm already just viewing here what I'm going to be scanning, and I click up, and now I'm starting to actually scan the pod. It's all in the green, and it would take me about a minute or so, maybe less, to go around the pod, and I will probably get a couple of scans around the pod, inside the pod, and the bottom of the pod as well. Then I would click again, and I will show you in a second what it looks like on screen. Here is a sneak peek of my progress after I aligned the scans together. The colors on the pod represent the individual scans the Artex Space Spider took. And I'm still learning in the manual and in the process of polishing the 3D model of the pod. There's still so much to learn and to research, and it is really exciting how much our lab transformed over the year. And once again, none of this would have happened without my amazing mentors, Dr. Guderjan and Dr. Sills. Thank you so much for letting me and for letting all of us, Dakota, John, and I, to work in the archaeology lab.
She's just trying to keep her job now. So what we're trying to accomplish is also create at UT Tyler a repository for these things. We're not out begging people to send stuff to us, but people who wish to contact us, because we're part of our job is to secure it for people in the future. I know that the second set of pots that are coming to us, the owners have said, well, none of our kids care about this crap. What's going to happen to them when we're going? They're just going to throw it away. I've got a house full of antiques from several generations of my family. My kid will probably turn it into firewood. You know, we all have these concerns. But so one of our roles is to be there for everybody to do this. So that's it for me. you had more questions? We'll take questions. Mark will take questions.
This has more to do with the people, I guess. Do you guys have any estimate at any given time in Wood County, how many cattle would have been living here in Wood County? 1,000, 10,000, 100,000?
I
I don't know
would
that
guess
anybody.
maybe not 100,000, but
Well,
probably, but over 1,000. I'm just, but I'm guessing.
We divide Caddo history up into 3 time zones. We call early Caddo, middle Caddo, and late Caddo. And it's just a construct that we did. And early Caddo started about AD 800, went up to 1200, and middle Caddo 12 to 1400, and then late Caddo 1500 to contact period. So we can go in then and look at these Caddo sites and determine the age of them by looking at the pottery, because pottery changes over time. So we can go in there and say, okay, it seems to be that there weren't a lot of Caddo here in what we call the early Caddo period. It was very scattered bunches around. Middle Caddo period, it just exploded. There were people everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. And then after that, it fell off again. Of course, the Europeans showed up, and we know what happened after that, but it was already on a decline. Smith County, where I live down there, I do not know of a site in Smith County that dates after 1450. That was before the Europeans showed up, so we can't blame it on the Europeans. Where did they go? I don't know. Why did they leave Smith County? I mean, I don't know. These are things that we don't know. But the fluorescence of the Caddo culture in Wood County was middle Caddo from 12 to 1500. And that was when there were mostly there people here. But, you know, again, you know, we just don't know. We have so little material. And that brings me to a point, which I'd like, if I could have just a minute. Okay, I'm gonna do my little preaching here. Okay, what can I do? Okay, you find some Indian pottery or something on your farm. You know, pieces of pottery you think are pottery or something like that. Or maybe it was an old whiskey still. Who knows what you found? You can do something about it. You can record that as an archaeological site. And a site is, we're talking about an archaeological site. That means just a place where something happened. You know, this, you can define around, it didn't happen there, it's where it happened right there. An archaeological site, then, we try to record those because it's important information. For instance, whiskey still. Say you find a whiskey still on your property and you record it. Okay, well, maybe some person is doing a study on whiskey stills in northeast Texas. That's important information to add into their database. Same thing with this Caddo stuff. We're learning from accumulation of all these little sites. And an archaeological site is just basically a little 3 or 4 page form. And basically what it's saying is what was found. Okay, I found a whiskey still. Where was it found? Okay, you get longitude, latitude, something, you know, a precise map going on the map. And then you can go in more detail about what did you find there. Well, I found some old barrels or something like that. You know, and give a little more description, but it's basically you're writing the history of that, and that goes on record at the University of Texas at Tarl. That's privileged information. Nobody except researchers can access. So you're adding to the database, you're adding to history, and I strongly encourage, you know, individuals that this is an important thing you can do, because, you know, you take my instance like this, half of the, or a third of the sites in Wood County, a guy from Smith County recorded. You know, so you can do a lot on your own, and it's not complicated. I'd be happy to work with y'all on it. I'll leave some cards on the table out there if anybody wants to contact me. But there's a lot you can do as individuals, and it doesn't have to even be on your property. I mean, say you know on my grandfather's property, there was a whiskey still, and I know where it is, you know, where the location and where you can do it. This is important information. You're a big part of history. So I encourage you to become involved.
Do you need to know what proof it is?
Huh?
Do you need to know what proof it is?
I've also got a little sack of miscellaneous Caddo sherds that I don't know where they came from. It's just some I collected during the years and stuff like that. So they have no real value to them, but they're interesting to look at. You know, some of y'all look, I'll pour them out on the table and y'all are welcome to pour over them and look at it. So it'll give you some idea. But like I say, the pottery that's here, I don't find a spit caddo, unless occasionally we have a trade good, you know, back and forth, stuff like that.
What part of Wood County have you found the most evidence of Caddo?
In the early 60s, I graduated from Glayward High School, and I went to Tyler Junior College. And I met a gentleman there by the name of Harry Darby and his wife Shirley. And we shared coon hunting and stuff like that and became good friends and still remain friends. I talked to Harry this morning. My father was interested in the Indian artifacts, and he became a collector. It was a hobby. He liked to do it. You know, like people collect old guns or things. He liked Indian artifacts. And he met Harry's parents, lived out of Coke, and became friends with them. And so Daddy started coming up here in Wood County and working. And he found a tremendous amount of stuff, like I say, that we just donated to UP and Tyler. But my daddy, bless his heart, kept pretty good records. Not archaeological records that would be acceptable today, but he kept good notes. He made drawings, what he found, where he found it, and really good with maps. He pinpointed where he found, he'd say, okay, Indian mound at this location, and he would describe what he found and everything like that. Based on that, I was able to go in and record those sites, even though I wasn't able to get on the property, you know, to do it. A lot of them was on Arnold Glenn's property. Well, y'all knew Arnold Glenn, big rancher up there around the coast. But anyway, all that material, needless to say, is now with the University of Texas. How much money have you accumulated in grant money to study this?
Over $100,000, and what I haven't told you yet is that our president is kicking in a $75,000 three-dimensional printer.
Royalties.
So
anyway, there's things that, as an individual, that you can do. Up the road from my house, a couple of miles, my cousin has property. I diddled around up there and found a Caddo site, found pottery on gopher mounds, and one neat little site up there. And so I decided I'd do a little archaeology on it. So a group of friends and I went out and we did remote sensing on it, ground penetrating radar. We did some controlled excavations. And anyway, the result of that was I published this material in the Caddo Archaeology Journal. And, you know, I excavated probably less than 1% of the total site, but still we found things like hearths, we found pits that we were able to get charred material out of and study. I sent off bone, have a lady analyze it. I sent pottery off that they studied the residue analysis on. I got 6 radiocarbon dates that I paid for out of my pocket, $650 a pop. And anyway, I ended up with a lot of material on this little site that I did on my own. You know, why? Well, it was interesting, you know. I could have spent that money and bought me a bass boat or, you know, a new backhoe or something. But anyway, it was interesting. So now we know a lot about this little old site that'll never, ever, ever have any more work done on it till it's destroyed. And there's literally just thousands of these little sites sitting around that, you know, if you can contribute just the least amount of information on it, you know, say, okay, we found we found some pottery at this location, and maybe describe the pottery, said, you know, draw a picture of it or something. That'll be the only information that probably will ever come from that little site. Because I guarantee you, it'll be destroyed someday.
Mark,
My
can you talk
question
about
was,
the
what
ones that-
section of Wood County have you found more, north, south,
Old
east,
Dry
west?
Creek and Canyon Creek, up around Coke, right west of Coke. A lot of it's under the lake now.
Right,
You know, a lot of that stuff that Daddy found and the sites he worked on are under the lake.
yeah.
So they're gone. So the only information that we'll ever know about those sites is what my dad dug, and then what's, you know, was donated there.
I want
Yo.
to talk about the Archaeological Conservancy for a second. It's a national organization, and what they do is they own sites, they protect them, and they own 10 in East Texas, but most of those became owned by the Conservancy because Mark arranged them, including site on his property.
Yeah, I
It's not his
donated.
property anymore because they own it.
Yeah, I donated. I have one little Caddo mound on my property that my uncle found back in the 50s and did a little work on, and I was able to buy the property, and so I donated this little acre or so to the Archaeological Conservancy.
So at least in theory, you know, whoever buys that property after Mark, they can't disturb that because it's not theirs, it's somebody else's.
Yeah.
That's the only way anybody can take anything from you is you give it to them.
No, there's a lot of things. Say, I had a Caddo mound on my property. You know, I knew it was Caddo mound. I had a professional archaeologist come and help me a little bit. We got it recorded. But there's a lot of things that you can do. Say you want to protect that. Of course, you could donate it to the Archaeological Conservancy. Also, the Texas Historical Commission. You can donate an easement to that, to where you keep the property. You can keep it in pasture and do anything else. You just agree not to destroy the site. And you can actually write this stuff off the income tax.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're not gonna get rich off of it, but I mean, you can do things to preserve sites that don't really affect you. I mean, it's not gonna affect your use of the property or anything else. You know, so there's a lot of things you can do.
What is
Well, to me, I'm looking at it, that's a pot, an Indian pot that was dug up, but it was never cleaned. It's still got the dirt clinging to it and stuff like that. And I'm sure it came from a burial. I don't know where it came from, or
Mid or later or early?
I hadn't looked at the pottery, so I can't tell you.
Okay.
Now, if it was to wash it up, you know, get the dirt off of it, the mud, the clay off of it, clean it up, then, you know, if I ended up with some pieces like this, you know, I could say, oh, that's Canton incised. And I know the age, approximate age, when they made Canton incised, and the area where they made Canton incised. But right now, it's a glob of mud.
Now, there is a book, I didn't go back into my library and look last night like I should have, but you can find everything that was done on the Lake Fork side.
Yeah.
It's in print. Seems like the most prominent name I remember was Mr. Skiles.
Yeah.
Skiles.
Bob Skiles.
Right?
We know about that book.
He's still around.
The other thing is, that I want to say is, in 2006, during the time I was county judge here, we were in terrible drought. And there was a lot of stuff that showed up around Lake Quitman, even some graves, even the.
I recorded that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we ended up doing, there was a young man came from the Caddo Nation in Binger, Oklahoma. Down here, we went out to the site, which was in somebody's backyard, basically.
Yeah.
You know, I don't remember if you were there when we went out.
I didn't do the ceremony.
But the representative of Caddo Nation came and he told the folks,
that just couldn't hardly stand not to put their hands on it. Y'all leave that alone. He took pictures, you know, finding we got rain sometime that winter. He got back underwater for the pottery.
I am reasonably certain that young man is now the tribal chairman. Yeah, that's, if I remember what
Bobby.
that time, who had come out, he's now the chairman of the tribe.
Yeah, it's Bobby Gonzalez.
Yeah.
There you go. I just couldn't remember his name. I didn't go back and look at my.
Did you get smoked?
Did what?
Did you get smoked?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been smoked several times, and you can smoke me anytime you want to.
He did it by their book.
Yeah.
Exactly what was spoken, you know, whatever he dedicated, whatever he did.
Yeah, no, I learned of that grave there, and I went out and investigated it, and, you know, that led to it, you know, but, I think did the goods end up with the Caddo?
I think he retrieved some of them later before the water came back up, but there's a lot of work. SMU had done a ton of work around Lake Quitman. There's a lot of stuff recorded if you can find it.
Yeah, yeah.
If you ever are looking for that sort of thing, you have trouble finding it, let us know, because we don't have trouble finding it. I did my doctoral work at SMU, so all of their reports have copies on my shelves.
That's nice to know.
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. That's easy.
If I ever retire for the 4th time and have any time left, I probably might take you up on that.
But, you know, there's a lot of other interesting things other than Caddo stuff. I mean, you know, there's a lot of historic stuff here. You know, I was joking about the whiskey stills, but
A lot of them in the eastern part of Wood County, the sandy land, where the springs don't ever quit running, no matter how dry.
yeah. So, you know, and that's an important part of history. You know, I mean, that's our part of it.
Syrup mills and other things.
Okay. I'm gonna, like I say, I'm gonna leave some cards and scare this pottery out on the table so while y'all get your cookie and look at it.